In the wake of the Diet coup, or attempted insurrection at Capitol Hill, CNN is responding by more aggressively advocating censorship and deplatforming than I've ever seen them do previously. So let's take a look. This is Brian Stelter talking to one of his guests. The guest is supposed to be an expert on this kind of stuff. Let's see what they have to say.
I think we got to do a couple things. One, there needs to be an intentional work by the social media companies collaborating together to work on violent extremism in the same way they worked on ISIS. When I started at Facebook in 2015, the number one challenge from a content perspective was the abuse of social media by the Islamic State. And there was a collaboration between the tech companies and between the tech companies and law enforcement to make it impossible for them to use the internet to recruit and radicalize mostly young Muslim men at the time around the world. Now we're talking about domestic audience in the United States. And the challenge is going to be partially that, ISIS did not have a domestic constituency in the United States Congress. But there is over half of the Republicans in Congress voted to overturn the election. And there will be a continual political pressure on the companies to not take it seriously. So I think first, you have to focus on those violent extremists, and those companies have to be brave in that way. And second, we have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN. And they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views. And so it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes in particular to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks for disinformation. And then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem. That these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes. This is allowing people to seek out information if they really want to, but not pushing it into their faces, I think is where we're going to have to go here.
Okay, so there's a lot here that I disagree with. But first, let me say, I view it as obvious that Newsmax, One American News Network, Trump, when he was doing this on a daily basis, the nonsense, the rigged election, fraudulent election, and then the insane conspiracies they came up with to justify that, it's all wrong, and it's all crazy, and there's no evidence for any of it. There's no proof for any of it. In fact, the one of the companies that distributed the voting machines or created the voting machines, they've now waged like a bunch of lawsuits or threatened to wage a bunch of lawsuits, and so a lot of these outlets, including like Newsmax or One American News Network, one of them, they had to do like on-air apologies to be like, yeah, there's no evidence for any of this stuff, so oops, are bad. And they're doing that because it would have gone to court and they would have lost. And, basically these companies could have been bankrupted because they're doing like libel and slander and defamation on a regular basis. So even with our incredibly lax free speech laws, as it should be, I'm a free speech absolutist, even with those, they know like, oh, we would have lost if it went to court. So anyway, the point I wanted to make up front is, I don't view it as in dispute as to how unhealthy and wrong that stuff is for society and for politics. Like, I 1,000,000% agree with the harshest critics of these people that it's toxic. A lot of this stuff is purely toxic, okay? But I do think that all of these ideas that they're either flirting with or outright advocating for would create even bigger problems than they're trying to solve. And it scares me that you can see people, liberals are already down this path big time, like Democratic types, but even some leftists sort of agree with this stuff. And that's terrifying to me because they don't know what they're asking for. Okay, so let's go through some of this. He says social media companies need to collaborate on violent extremism like they did with ISIS. So they're saying, collaborate on violent extremism of the domestic variety in the same way that they did with ISIS. Well, first of all, I don't even know exactly what they did on ISIS, but to the extent that there's any crackdown, it's not that hard to crack down when there's like beheadings being posted on social media, because beheadings are, of course, wildly illegal in every country on earth. And so you can go after those people and prosecute them for the freaking crimes that they're committing. So it's not like the issue wasn't just a social media issue. The issue was like, oh, hey, the worst crimes imaginable that are being rubbed in our faces. Well, obviously something should be done about this. But what are you talking about in terms of the domestic audience? Like, what exactly do you want Twitter, Facebook, YouTube to do about this stuff? So he continues, make it impossible for them to use the internet to recruit and radicalize. There's no way to do that unless you fully ban like that entire political genre and political ideology. I don't know how you, like, of course, if you allow people to speak freely, some people are going to be fucking crazy, and some other crazy people are going to listen to those crazy people and maybe do crazy things. You can't say the solution is to, quote, make it impossible for them to use the internet to recruit and radicalize, because that's not possible unless you do a full authoritarian crackdown and just say anything that I don't like or anything that might be borderline, we got to get rid of it. Like, that's the ultimate logic of this argument that they're making. Then they say, turn down the capability of conservative influencers to reach these audiences. How? Listen, these people are my direct competition, whether it's Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro, whoever you want to name that's like more of an independent or new media. They're not independent really, but new media conservatives. These people are my direct competition. So if I was selfish, I'd be like, yeah, clamp down on them and then bolster my stuff because that would help me. But it goes beyond selfish motives here. The fact of the matter is, it's a package deal. Any kind of turning down of their capability to reach audiences would also turn down me, would also turn down Humanist Report, Rational National, you name it. Every single, left-wing show that you can think of, all of us would be screwed under an algorithm where they say, oh, the fringe right-wingers need to be tamped down because they view us as fringe left-wingers. Now, you would say, well, Kyle, the things you say are true, the things they say are false. Yes, but you can't just ban people saying false things. You can't do that. That is deeply authoritarian. You're allowed to be wrong about stuff. You are. As long as you're not doing direct threats of violence, as long as you're not doing like provable, demonstrable libel, slander, defamation, well, then you have to let people say whatever the hell they want to say. So when they say turn down the capability of conservative influencers to reach these audiences, well, congratulations to the people who agree with this, because yes, it is those exact same algorithms that screw channels like mine. And I've told you guys, we know, because there's numbers on the back end of YouTube where you can track this stuff. Back during the 2016 election, we grew at an amazing rate. And one of the main reasons for that is our stuff would be recommended all over YouTube. You could be watching a video from CNN and then get recommended a secular talk video, and you watch it and you like it and you subscribe. Well, YouTube did is they cracked down on what they call borderline content, which is not the extremist stuff, but it's borderline as to whether or not it's extreme. And then they reduce the amount that my content gets shown to new audiences. So in other words, like if you've been watching this show for a long time, yes, you'll get recommended secular talk videos. You'll get them, popping up in your feed on YouTube. But if you're not already watching it, it's a lot harder to come across it because they stopped recommending it like they used to recommend it because I'm borderline. These kinds of algorithms are what they're talking about. And they want to do it to stop Ben Shapiro and to stop Steven Crowder and to stop, the Newsmax types and the One American News Networks types. I get it. They have a terrible ideology and they're wrong about virtually everything. But any attempt to crack down on them has the unintended consequences, and maybe it's intended, of cracking down on me and cracking down on all the left-wing commentators that you enjoy. That's just how it works. That's how it works. There's no way around it. And they even say there, like, a lot of these people are bigger than CNN. Yeah, whose problem is that? Whose fault is that? It's your guys' fault. You have shitty content. I'm sorry, but it's true. They don't do a good job. I mean, they pushed Russiagate relentlessly and they were wrong about every single thing they said. So maybe that's the problem, is that you're not interesting, you're not entertaining, you don't do a good job. Maybe that's the problem. You push conspiracy theories. Now, by the way, that's the other point here, which is, so they want to crack down on the things that they view as bad conspiracy theories. Now, I happen to agree on this one, that it's a bad conspiracy, the whole fraudulent election, rigged election nonsense. But they're not going to be objective because they're not saying like YouTube rules, Facebook rules, Twitter rules should crack down on conspiracies, full stop. They're saying just the ones I don't like. Because the people over at CNN, the people on this panel, these people bought into Russiagate wholesale, and they were provably wrong. They were provably wrong. Yes, some people in the Trump administration went down, but it had nothing to do with Russia. It had to do with corruption, like General Flynn, for example, and his, back channel connections. It wasn't about Russia. Sorry, I know a lot of people, for their emotional well-being, want it to be that, but it's not that. They had crazy conspiracy. Donald Trump, a Manchurian candidate, agent of Russia since 1987. Provably wrong. But this was a mainstream belief. It was a very common belief. Now, should your stuff get banned, deplatformed, deprioritized in the algorithm as a result of that? Listen, what CNN wants, what MSNBC wants, what Fox News wants, it's very simple, it's very straightforward, it's very clear. They want to be the go-to sources for everybody when it comes to news and politics. They want YouTube, they want all the social media outlets to pump out and prioritize their stuff above and beyond everybody else. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're leaning right and you like the independent right-wing people, or you lean left, you like the independent left-wing people, you like new media outlets that are, a little smaller in nature, but on the way up. They want to make sure they quash the competition and have them be the only game in town. The only game in town. And they even admit it, that last point there, it's like they crossed that line. They're trying to cloak it a little bit, but they crossed that line at the end when they say, like One American News Network and Newsmax, they have free speech. They can say what they want to say, but Verizon doesn't have to carry them. AT&T doesn't have to carry them. Comcast doesn't have to carry them. So in other words, go after the provider to effectively censor and deplatform them, even while you make the Weasley argument like, well, you could say whatever you want to say, but there are consequences for it. Take that logic and apply it on all the other social media outlets. You could say what you want to say, but there are consequences of it. You could say you think it's a fraudulent election, a rigged election, but we're going to ban you from Twitter. You could say whatever you want to say, but there are consequences. Okay, well, you could say whatever you want to say about the JFK assassination, but it's a conspiracy and we're going to have to get rid of you. There are consequences if you say the wrong thing. You could say whatever you want to say about 9/11. There are consequences. Well, guys, how many times have I made this point? That if these outlets were around in the lead up to the Iraq War, they would be banning the people or deprioritizing or deplatforming the people who were correct and saying there are no weapons of mass destruction. Because the consensus was there are weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein is a threat. So if you were a truth teller, you would have been banned. The Syria example, people went after anybody who questioned the Syrian gas attacks or the source of the Syrian gas attacks. They were maligned and smeared and called conspiracy theorists. CNN wrote articles about that. And then come to find out, we had whistleblowers who came out and were like, actually, they were right. So, in other words, it's not really like, what's the truth? And then we're going to ban people who don't tell the truth and prop up people who tell the truth. No. People are flawed. People are human beings. What they're calling for is a situation where let's ban or deplatform or censor or deprioritize all the people who are not ideologically in agreement with me or who get in the way of me and my interests. That's what they're doing. And they're acting like it's some sort of virtuous crusade that they're on to get the truth out there in the mainstream. Utter nonsense. Complete and utter nonsense. Listen, I don't like any of the right-wing new media outlets at all. I hate One American News Network. I hate Newsmax. I think they're terrible. I think they have a genuinely negative effect on the public. But I also understand there is no such thing as a ministry of truth. Because then who's going to watch the Watchmen? So you cannot micromanage and police the discourse and censor and deplatform and deprioritize all willy-nilly. Because guess what? Whoever's making those decisions, they have their own biases. They have their own perspectives. They have their own flaws. They believe in their own conspiracies, even though they'd swear up and down that they don't believe in conspiracies. So never fall for the idea that we could fix this by proposing solutions that are creating even bigger problems. We have to stand by in a principled way and say free speech is important. I'm not saying it's a First Amendment issue because it's not. That involves the government and speech. This is not the government. But it for shit sure is the principle of free speech. As much as I hate Newsmax, as much as I hate One American News Network, as much as I hate Ben Shapiro, as much as I hate Steven Crowder, as much as I hate anybody who's pushing these bogus ideas and this terrible ideology, and I hate them more than anybody, you can't ban them. You shouldn't deprioritize them. You have to handle this like adults. And so what does that mean? Listen, it means do what I used to do all the fucking time when Alex Jones was not banned from these platforms. I would play the clip of the shit he said, and then I would debunk every single goddamn thing he said. That's what you do. Try becoming likable and entertaining and fact-checking in a way that's correct. Maybe that's how you limit the influence of some of these outlets. I mean, that's the thing, is they don't reckon with the fact that there's a reason why people don't really turn to CNN and MSNBC for their, for the truth in the world. These outlets have been wrong so many times and have lied to them so many times that people are like, I'm looking for a new place to get information. And they happen to answer it in the wrong ways, okay? Plenty of people will go crazy and turn to One American News Network and Newsmax, and they're they're definitely more wrong than the traditional media outlets. But I wouldn't ban One American News Network. I wouldn't ban Newsmax. I wouldn't ban CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, because that is authoritarian. That is what it is. It should be an open system where you can go wherever the hell you want to go and everybody's treated equally by the algorithms. But by the way, in that system, we'd be way bigger than we are, because we've been tamped down on since the borderline content rules went into place a few years ago. So I just don't know how to get across to people this very basic idea that authoritarianism is bad. Censorship as a general rule, deplatforming, deprioritizing, all that stuff is really bad. And you're now seeing it pop up in a bunch of different ways. But since we had the Capitol Hill insurrection and the Diet coup attempt, now people are more open to authoritarian approaches because they think, we need it to keep us safe. Well, guys, this is the exact same shit that happened in the wake of 9/11. The arguments were like, we need to do this to keep us safe. We need to do the Patriot Act to keep us safe. You're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of liberty and a little freedom for security. These were the arguments that were made. And listen, it's total bullshit. There's another article from AP that just came out. I'm going to read you the title. Extremists Exploit a Loophole in Social Moderation. Podcasts. So now they're saying, Steve Bannon has a podcast. Steve Bannon pushes bad ideas. His podcast should be banned. You can't just ban people for being wrong, for promoting conspiracies. You can't ban people for having a bad ideology. You can't do that. I mean, that is the definition of authoritarianism. And you could try to cloak it in the idea that we're virtuous and we're moral and we're just and we're right. But that's not true. None of that stuff is true. AOC said that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are responsible for what happened at the insurrection. As much as I hate Mark Zuckerberg and as much as I hate Facebook, no, they're not. If terrorists plan an attack and they do it on the phone, they call each other and coordinate everything on the phone. Does anybody say, AT&T, you need to ban not only these people who are terrorists, but ban anybody who's a potential terrorist from using your service? Nobody says that. In fact, people think that's absurd. Why? Because everybody understands that's not the way phone companies work. That's not the way the provider works. It's just there. So they're not in the business of micromanaging and filtering and censoring, and they're not in that business. Why is it people understand that with AT&T? Nobody wants to shut down the phone company or ban all potential criminals or terrorists from making phone calls. But when it comes to Twitter or Facebook, all of a sudden everybody wants incredible censorship and deplatforming and to micromanage it all. Why? Why is that? Why is that? It's real. It's insanity. And these people don't know what they're asking for, because I guarantee you it will come back to bite you in the ass if you support it 100%. We've already seen it. It's not even up in the air. How many times have I told you guys? The Red Scare podcast, they were banned on Twitter. Why? I have no idea. The Chapo Trap House Reddit, they were banned. Why? I have no idea. You want to talk about lefties being censored? Anybody who's like a Marxist or communist or anarchist, they're the first on the frickin' chopping block. People who really question power and authority are the first ones to bear the brunt of censorship. It always is the case. Always. And so, again, talk to Max Blumenthal or Ben Norton or Abby Martin or Rania Khalek, the Gray Zone. Talk to any of these out. They've experienced it firsthand. They know. Again, I only know just the deprioritizing angle, which is bad enough. But, of course, this is going to happen. So, anyway, careful what you wish for, man. I've never seen... It's a very... very openly authoritarian environment at the moment as a result of genuinely bad people doing genuinely bad things at the Capitol, egged on by One American News Network, Newsmax, and the President of the United States. They're definitely to blame, at least partially, for what happened. They are. But what do we do in response to that? Do we just ban everything? I say hell no to that. And if you say hell yes to that, again, it's going to come back to bite you in the ass, so be ready for that.